Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Solar for Manufactured Homes. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance. And before we get started with our webinar presentation, I'd like to go over a few quick webinar logistics. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can call in via telephone, or you can connect via your computer's mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console, you can do that by clicking on the orange arrow that you see circled on your screen. And you can also click on that orange arrow to expand the webinar console. And one of the things that you might like to do with your webinar console is to submit your questions or your comments. We're going to be saving about 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for a Q&A with the audience. And we're going to get to as many questions as we can. So please type those questions in when you think of them. Don't necessarily wait till the very end to type those in. One final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email probably this afternoon with a copy of the webinar recording and a PDF of the slides. And we'll also be posting all of those materials on CESA's website at cesa.org/webinars. So with that, I'd like to now pass it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Wafa Elamin. Wafa is a project manager here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and she is going to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar. As Sam said, my name is Wafa Elamin, and I'm a project manager here at CESA. And a little bit of background about CESA. The Clean Energy States Alliance is a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations that are working together to advance clean energy. CESA works with state leaders, federal agencies, industry representatives, and other stakeholders to develop clean energy programs and inclusive renewable energy markets. CESA members, who are mostly state agencies, you can see some of them here on this screen, include many of the most innovative, successful, and influential public funders of the clean energy initiatives in the country. Today's Solar for Manufactured Homes webinar is a component of CESA's Scaling Up Solar for Under-Resourced Communities project. The Scaling Up Solar for Under-Resourced Communities project, its initiative aimed to accelerate the development of solar projects that benefit low and moderate income or LMI households and communities. The project has three distinct subsets of the solar LMI market. That's single-family homes, multifamily affordable housing, and today's topic is manufactured homes. This project is made possible through funding award from the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Energy Technologies Office. The subject matter for today's webinar comes from CESA's newly published 2-volume report, Solar for Manufactured Homes, an assessment of the opportunities and challenges in 14 states. This report is the first national study of solar for manufactured homes, and it provides a landscape assessment of the manufactured housing market and shows where these homes are located across the country. It goes on to explain the general obstacles to solar access by low and moderate income communities, as well as additional challenges related more specifically to installing solar PV with manufactured housing. It identifies the types of solar technologies that can work with manufactured housing, and there's 9 case studies that highlight the ways in which solar can be deployed to benefit these LMI manufactured housing residents. The report provides general recommendations for the development of solar manufactured homes. The second volume of the report examines more specifically the manufactured homes and manufactured housing communities in 14 different states in the country that have different regions and each have different housing markets and solar programs and policies. The states that are examined are Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Maine, Michigan, Missouri, New Mexico, North Carolina, Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. You can find this report directly on our website. It's linked below, and you can download it and read it. And I'd like to take the time to introduce Warren Leon, who is going to be presenting on today's subject matter. Warren Leon is Executive Director of CESA. He oversees the organization's day-to-day operations and leads strategy development. He has written and edited many reports for CESA, including serving as a lead author for Returning Champions State Clean Energy Leadership since 2015, Solar with Justice, Strategies for Powering Up Under-Resourced Communities and Growing an Inclusive Solar Market, and the report that we'll be focusing on for today, Solar for Manufactured Homes, an Assessment for the Opportunities and Challenges in 14 States. Prior to working for CESA, Warren was a director of the Massachusetts Renewable Energy Trust, executive director of the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association, and the deputy director of programs at the Union for Concerned Scientists. He co-authored the influential book, The Consumer's Guide to Effective Environmental Choices, and holds a PhD from Harvard University. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Warren to present today's material.
Hey, thanks very much, Wafa. And as Wafa indicated, I'm going to talk to you about our new report, give you a sense of what we did, how we did it, and what we concluded. And the purposes of the report, first of all, before I get into any of the details, what we were trying to do was to understand how to best use solar to provide benefits to manufactured homes and their residents. Now, this is a part of the solar market that's received very little attention up till now. And on top of that, it's a part of the housing market that's often ignored, not just by solar, but ignored in lots of other ways. And as Wafa mentioned, we focus on 14 states. We're providing information on those. But if you're not from one of those 14 states, please still listen to this webinar because we have a lot of information about national trends and national possibilities. And our recommendations apply to all the states in the country. Our next step with this project is to develop a learning network where we will put together folks who are interested in talking with us further about solar for manufactured homes, learning about the topic, and we'll encourage you to sign up for that learning network. And then after that, we're going to work with a smaller group of states and utilities that might be interested in exploring doing pilot projects for manufactured homes. Our overall goal with all this effort is to accelerate the development of low and moderate income solar projects for manufactured homes. And as Wafa mentioned earlier, the whole thing is being supported by a grant from the U.S. Department of Energy through the Solar Energy Technologies Office. So there we go. Let me first, before we go further, make it clear what a manufactured home is. Many of you have probably heard the term mobile homes or mobile homes, and this term is a little out of favor, and now what folks focus on and use is the term manufactured homes. And what a manufactured home is, it's a home that's built in a factory. It's then transported on a permanent chassis to its destination. And because it's on a permanent chassis, it can be moved again. The home can be in one section, sometimes called a single wide, or it could be in multiple sections, a double wide or more. And because it's on a chassis, there's a potential to move the home from site to site, although that doesn't happen very often. Since 1976, all the manufactured homes that are produced have to meet the standards that are set by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And unlike a home that's built on site, these homes have to conform to that federal code, and they don't necessarily need to conform to the state and local building codes. The HUD standards were upgraded in 1994, and we could therefore roughly divide the manufactured homes that are out there in the landscape into three eras: those from before 1976, those from 1976 to 1994, and those that have been built and shipped to market since 1994. Now, manufactured homes are different than another type of home that's also built in a factory, and that's a modular home. Like a manufactured home, it's built in a factory, it's transported to the home site, but a modular home is required to meet state and local building codes, and it's placed on a permanent foundation. So why are we focusing on solar for manufactured homes? There are several reasons. First is that we believe in general that if you want to have equity in the energy market and equity in the development of solar, it's essential to incorporate and include low and moderate income households. And because there are a significant number of low and moderate income households who live in manufactured homes, that market can't be ignored. On top of that, if we ignore this market and ignore other components of the LMI market, there's the potential that solar will end up with lower public support in the future because it's perceived as only benefiting the well-to-do. Now, a lot of low and moderate income households, including those living in manufactured homes, have a high energy burden in which they have to pay a disproportionate share of their income for energy, and solar has the potential to help them and reduce their burden. In general, we're going to make the greatest progress when we don't think of the LMI market as an undifferentiated whole, but instead think of it as a series of submarkets, each submarket requiring its own strategy. And manufactured homes is one of those submarkets. Affordable multifamily housing is another. Single-family homes is another. So there are a series of submarkets, all of which needs its own strategy. When we look at this submarket, it is quite big. There are 8.5 million manufactured homes out there across America. That turns out to be 6.1% of all the homes. And if we look at just the LMI market, it's a greater share than 6.1% because the vast majority of the folks who live in manufactured homes are either low or moderate income. Manufactured homes are a large share of the unsubsidized affordable housing out there, and it's especially important to keep in mind that most of these residents own their own homes. That creates a potential for building wealth, although there are limitations to that, and it tends to mean that they may stay longer in their home than if they were a renter. Now, there are a lot of barriers to doing solar for manufactured homes, and the barriers come into two different categories. The first are generic barriers that apply to all LMI solar. And the most important one is that a household with limited income and limited wealth has difficulty paying the initial cost of a PV system. They need some sort of financing or some sort of other assistance to help them pay that initial cost. It's also important that a solar installation for an LMI household be risk-free. If I were to say to an upper-income household, I have a deal for you. You can get solar, and there's a 90% chance you're going to save significant money, but there's a 10% chance that you're going to lose money. Well, that's a good bet for that household, but that's not a good bet for an LMI household, because even if there's only a 10% risk of losing money, that's a risk too great, because that could put that household's total financial well-being at risk. LMI households often have difficulty taking advantage of the federal tax credits because oftentimes they don't have enough income to use those tax credits. LMI households have historically been ignored by solar marketers because they've been perceived as a less interested audience, an audience that's harder to reach, and a riskier audience. And because they've been ignored by solar marketers, and there tend to be fewer installations in LMI communities, the audience is less familiar with solar technology. They know fewer people who have already installed solar. So all of those are generic barriers, but there are also some specific barriers related to manufactured homes. First and most important is that many roofs of manufactured homes cannot support a PV system. The load is too great, or roof-mounted installations would have problems sort of piercing the skin. On top of that, and I want to mention that, sometimes a possibility instead of a roof-mounted system is a ground-mounted system. But in lots of places, there's not sufficient space near the house to do a ground-mounted system. On top of that, residents in manufactured homes communities in big mobile home parks like the one in the picture usually do not own the land. They own the house, but they rent the land, and that provides problems, and we'll talk about those later. Well, before I talk about what we learned, let me explain how we researched the subject. We decided to focus in on 14 states, and the reason for only doing 14 states is that our research project was fairly laborious. We went into great depth. We did not have the ability to cover all 50 states. So we selected 14 states from across the country. We chose those 14 states from among the 26 states that have either the highest total number of manufactured homes in the state or the highest percentage of manufactured homes in the state. And then we used several criteria, including geographic distribution, different types of solar markets, different types of solar policies, to select 14 states to focus on. In studying those states, we did a wide range of desktop research to learn about the solar policies in the state, the nature of the solar market in the state, trends in manufactured housing sales in the state. We relied heavily on U.S. Census Bureau data. That's generally the best information on the manufactured housing stock across the country. And every year in the American Community Survey and every other year in the American Housing Survey, there's information provided that relates to manufactured homes. The only catch is that that's information based on sampling. There are each year about 2 million households included in the American Community Survey, and then the Census Bureau extrapolates from those 2 million houses to the rest of the country. And the problem with that doesn't allow you granular detail about the exact location of manufactured homes in particular communities. So to supplement the information in these Census Bureau reports, we also gathered data from a company called Datacomp. They have a proprietary database about all the manufactured home communities in the country. In other words, the mobile home parks. And we picked on this information from Datacomp because they're the largest provider of manufactured home value reports and appraisals, and they have data on the location, the size, the rental prices, the housing costs, and other characteristics of all those communities. In fact, in our 14 states, they had data on 24,391 communities. Now, there's a limitation in that data in that it's been collected over time, not just all in this last current year. So some of the information is outdated, but it's still better than anything else. And we then did was we took the Datacomp data and linked it to census household income data. And we also linked it to the utility service territories of all those 24,391 communities. We supplemented that with surveys and interviews of solar installers. We supplemented that with survey responses from 170 manufactured homes residents. And we included other data and research information. Now, I have to acknowledge all the data sources we have some margin of error. So our statistics are never going to be exact to a high degree of precision, but they still give a more complete picture than previously, and the directional results are clear. In other words, what I mean by that, if we say in X state, 42% of the communities have age restrictions, i.e. they're only open to households older than 55, it might not be 42%. It might be 40% or 44%, but it's not going to be 90%, and it's not going to be 10%. So what did we learn? There. First, here's from the U.S. Census information about all the manufactured homes across the country and what share of the housing stock they are. And in this and in all of our results, our most significant conclusion is that there are dramatic differences among states. If you look here, the percentages in the share of the housing stock, it goes from 1% up to 17% in the case of New Mexico. And then when we look at the issue of the households that are in communities as opposed to manufactured homes that are on individual plots of land spread out across the countryside, there's very big differences among the states. Among our 14 states, in one of them, only 10% of the homes were in manufactured home communities. But in one of the other states, 69% of the homes were in manufactured home communities. And then even within those manufactured home communities, there's very big differences among the states. In some states, most of the communities are quite large. One of the states, 64% of the communities have more than 100 home sites in it. In one of the other states, only 17% of the communities have more than 100 home sites. Now, we need to think about that a little differently, though, because the large communities are by definition larger than the small communities. Even in the state with only 17% of the communities being large, most of the home sites in all the communities are in large communities. In terms of age-restricted communities, it goes from 2% in one state to 36% in another state. In some states, more of the residents in manufactured homes are low and moderate income than in other states. In some states, there are more resident-owned communities and other nonprofit communities. A resident-owned community is one in which the residents collectively through a cooperative own the land and then individually own the homes. In other nonprofit communities, there can be an owner such as a housing trust or a municipality. Well, there's a big variation among the states there. In a couple of states, there were no resident-owned communities or nonprofits, but in one of the states, there were 202 such communities. Well, I want you to think about all the data we have for each of the states in the report. You could find the number of manufactured homes communities and number of home sites that are in LMI census tracts. You could find out how many communities and home sites there are in the service territory of different utilities. You could see how many communities there are by different sizes. You could see the extent to which census tract income levels vary depending on the size of the community. You could see how many of the communities have age restrictions and to what extent those age-restricted communities are in LMI census tracts. In addition to all that data, which mostly came from data comp and the census information we linked to, We also included discussion of the solar market and the policy landscape in each state. We, with the help of folks from the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, we provide information about the economics of a typical solar installation in that state, a solar installation of a size that would be appropriate for a manufactured home. And then we have state-specific recommendations for each of the 14 states. Another thing we have for each state is two maps like the two on this page. These are for North Carolina. In the upper map, we show the number of manufactured homes by county, and the darker counties are the places with the largest number of manufactured homes. In the bottom map, we compare the percentage of the houses in that county that are manufactured homes with the percentage of the houses that are low income. And the places where there are both high percentage of manufactured homes and a high percentage of low-income residents, that's indicated in the dark gray. And like in most states, we can see that there's significant overlap, that there tend to be more manufactured homes in those counties that have low incomes. Well, what to do about this and how to get solar into the manufactured homes market? It hasn't been featured heavily up till now, but there are a variety of approaches. One is rooftop installations. Although many of the manufactured homes can't support a rooftop installation, some can. There's a special potential to use solar for new manufactured homes because the cost will be less and financing will be easier if the solar is installed right in the factory at the time of production, and financing is included in the loan or mortgage on that home. So that's one potential option, rooftop installations. There's also potential for ground-mounted installations or pole-mounted installations. There are places where community solar developments, like in the lower right picture from Mascoma Meadows in New Hampshire, where a community solar installation was developed to provide power for the vast majority of the residents in that community behind the installation. And on top of that, there are some companies and organizations, including NYSERDA and VEIC, that have been exploring the concept of developing zero-energy modular homes that can be placed on the foundations on the home sites of manufactured homes and manufactured home communities. In the report, we have case studies of 9 promising projects. A range of different strategies have been used. These are strategies that we think in one way or another hold promise and could be replicated in other locations. And finally, what I want to talk about is 8 strategies that we recommend for advancing solar for manufactured homes. And after that, we could turn to your questions and comments. Our first recommendation is that it's important to assess the manufactured housing stock in the state or utility service territory that you want to focus on. The differences in the housing stock are so dramatic from place to place that it doesn't make sense to get started until you know exactly what sorts of homes you're looking at, where they are, the extent to which they're on individual plots of land or in communities, what are the size of those communities, what the extent to which those communities are actually lived in by folks with low and moderate incomes, and so on. We also think it's desirable to start with modest targeted efforts. This is not an easy market. It's not going to be possible to go out there with some initiative on day one that's going to lead to 50,000 installations in a year. So we're going to be better off if we could produce a track record of success by focusing on the low-hanging fruit and then moving out from there and building on that and expanding the efforts over time. It's important to recognize that special funding or incentives will be necessary. When we looked at the economics of solar for a typical solar installation in our 14 states, there was only one place, California, where there was potential for manufactured homes to install solar installations without some sort of special additional incentive that isn't already in place. We have that problem of overcoming the hurdle of the initial cost of the installation. We have the problem of making sure that the project is going to be risk-free to the household. And so some sort of special funding or incentive from either the state government, from a utility, or from some private party is going to be necessary. One promising strategy is to look at a Solarize effort. What Solarize is a campaign strategy that started in Portland, Oregon quite a few years ago now. It involves a community-based education and marketing campaign on solar focused on that community. It incorporates group discount pricing. That, in general, is a good strategy for getting solar out there in the marketplace, and there have been studies that show the benefits of Solarize for getting solar out into the community, but it's especially well matched to manufactured homes for two reasons. First is we're dealing with an audience that has limited familiarity with solar, limited personal contact with folks who've installed solar previously. So a education and marketing campaign can help overcome that. And secondly, most residents of manufactured homes live in close proximity to other residents of manufactured homes. Either they're in a large manufactured home community, or even if they're on an individual plot of land, it tends to be the case that folks who are living in a manufactured home on their own individually owned plot of land tend to live near other folks in a similar situation. So you could target that audience well through a community-based campaign. Our last four strategies. One is to target resident-owned communities and other nonprofit communities. The situation's sort of the same with both of them, even though the ownership structure is a little different, but I'll talk about it in relationship to the rocks. In that case, the land's owned by the residents. That means they don't have to worry that the community owner is going to raise the rent and force them to move the house to another location. They tend to have more pride in their community, a collective stake in the community, strong community feeling, and it's easier to ensure that the savings will flow to the residents and not just flow to the community owner without it being passed on to the resident. So a good starting point is to look at those rocks, look at other nonprofit communities in a state. Another worthwhile strategy is to promote certain types of large community scale solar arrays. This gets around the problem that many of the houses can't support solar on the roof. And there are a variety of different community scale projects that can be done. One is in the picture here, is an array that provides power to community facilities and common loads, things like the street lights. That load may not be so great in some communities, but in some communities it can be significant. Again, one has to make sure that the benefits of that array, the financial benefits, are flowing to the residents and not just going into the pocket of the community owner, but there's potential for that. It's also possible to do a dedicated project for a manufactured home community like they did in Mascoma Meadows. That was a case where, working with nonprofits and other partners, they were able to get a donation of nearby land and produce a community solar project that's providing significant financial benefits to those residents. There's another project we report on in Lakeville, New York, where the community, it was another resident-owned community, they had some extra land that they were able to rent out to a solar developer for a community solar project. And on top of that, in quite a few states now that have community solar, shared solar programs, there's a requirement that a certain share of those beneficiaries of those projects be folks with low and moderate incomes. And we could look for targeting the manufactured homes market with some of those community solar projects. And one nice thing about it is it's easy to identify the location of a large number of manufactured homes residents who are low and moderate income, because the location of those manufactured homes communities are known. Now, it's important with community solar to ensure that the consumers are not being placed at financial risk. There have been cases in the past where folks have been locked into a long-term contract where, for a variety of reasons, it's been difficult for them to get out of the contract. It's important to make sure that any community solar project that is targeted at the LMI market is designed in a way that those households will not end up paying more, but they're going to end up saving more. Two last strategies I want to mention is it's really quite worthwhile to support efforts to incorporate solar into new manufactured homes. That can be efficient, it can be cost effective, but it has two limitations. The first limitation is that the market for new manufactured homes is not that robust at the moment. Only about 94,000 are shipped to market annually. When you compare that to the 8.5 million manufactured homes that are already out there across the country, we're not going to reach a high percentage of this market by only targeting the new homes. On top of that, most new manufactured homes are purchased by folks who have moderate and middle incomes, not by those with low incomes. So if you want to reach the low income market, you have to look at the existing housing stock. Finally, there are a variety of strategies that can deal with the issue of the households having difficulty paying for the initial cost of solar, and that can include third-party ownership, various on-bill payment plans, and different types of special financing options that might be offered through either a state agency, organization, an agency at the federal government like the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or so on. Well, we hope you'll be interested in learning more about this topic. If you want to join our learning network on solar for manufactured homes, please contact Wafa May and she'll add you to the list, and we'll be having other events and after this, and we'll share information you might have about solar for manufactured homes. With that in mind, let's switch to questions.
Thank you so much for the great presentation, Warren. We've got a good list of questions that have come in through the audience, and hopefully we'll be able to get through as many of them as we can. A few folks are interested in knowing about since knowing that the existing manufactured homes often require a lot of retrofitting and energy efficiency improvements, what does that mean for adding solar to these homes?
That's a good question. And before solar is added to a home, a very careful assessment needs to be made of its current energy performance. We have to acknowledge that there are quite a few older, really inefficient homes, especially those that date from before 1976, that are not great candidates for solar. Those homes would be better off focusing either on some way to replace the home with a newer model or focus on energy efficiency and make significant energy efficiency improvements before you add solar to the home. On the other hand, for a home that is not in quite that dire straits when it comes to efficiency, where there's potential for energy efficiency improvements, but it's not a house that should be totally replaced, a package deal that incorporates solar with energy efficiency at the same time could lead to better financial payback for the resident and more efficient than just focusing on either energy efficiency in isolation or solar in isolation.
Great, thank you. And kind of going off of that, are roofs in the newer manufactured homes, are they typically strong enough to support solar?
Not all of them, no. There are some newer manufactured homes that are able to support solar installations. It's more likely in a double wide home than a single wide. And it's more likely in some states than others. For example, we were talking with, in the research for the report, with one of the biggest manufacturers of manufactured homes, Clayton, and they say that a high percentage of the homes they ship to market in California can support solar, but in some other states, a smaller percentage can.
Great, thank you. We have another question, or a few questions that have come in about some of the commonly manufactured homes are all electric and other ones are not. Some of them use natural gas and heat pumps or heating and cooling. How does that kind of fit into for installing solar using electric?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you know, clearly a home that's all electric is going to have a bigger electric load, and that means it can support a larger solar installation. And all things being equal, a slightly larger installation is going to tend to be a little less expensive per kilowatt hour than a smaller installation. It may also be the case that a home with natural gas, both for heating and for cooking, in some cases may not have a sufficient electric load to make solar a good bet for it. One would have to look at the specifics with that particular house.
Great, thank you. One question has come in. Can you share a little bit more about how public incentives can be used to finance solar development for manufactured homes and manufactured housing communities?
Yes, there can be different strategies in different places, and this is not different than other approaches for bringing solar to the LMI market separate from manufactured homes. There can be rebates. There can be a state-supported loan program or lease program. There potentially can be interest rate buy-downs. There can be support from the state to make it possible for municipalities and utilities to offer on-bill financing and do that in a way that the cost of the home is paid for over time through a party's monthly electric bills. So there are a range of different ways that incentives can be provided.
Wonderful, thank you. There's some folks who have shared that they've seen resistance for solar installers to even look at or quote manufactured homes for potential structure or the possibility of PV solar systems. They kind of see the job as too small or too much work to be profitable. How can groups and organizations work with installers to expand this market?
Yeah, that's clearly an issue. You know, you can't just go into the typical manufactured home and install the same cookie cutter installation that an installer might be installing on a variety of site-built homes nearby. It needs a special approach. That's one of the reasons why we were arguing for pilot projects and for a solarized approach. You know, if you do a solarized campaign and you say, we're going to work with the community to try to install 50 installations over the next year in this community, well, that's going to get an installer's attention. If they have the possibility of 50 installations and they know either the local utility, a rural electric co-op perhaps, or a municipal utility, or some sort of nonprofit organization or a state energy agency is going to be behind promoting this in the area, they're going to have more incentive than getting involved than if just some random individual customer calls them up.
Great. There's another question that has come in from a few different folks about how is storage incorporated into these solar systems, these solar PV systems for manufactured homes, and are there other resilience options that can be considered?
There could be, you know, in most cases, adding storage is going to increase the cost and not necessarily reducing the payback period time or make the installation more financially beneficial for the household. However, having said that, there are reasons for trying to incorporate solar for manufactured homes. One is, as you suggested, it can provide some resiliency, some ability for that home to retain power during a power outage. And on top of that, there can be a case where the utility can benefit from installing more solar in homes in their service territory. We have a very interesting case study in the report of a project, McKnight Lane in Vermont, where the utility was involved, where nonprofit organizations were involved, where solar plus storage was brought to new modular homes that were placed on the site of a defunct manufactured homes community.
Thank you, Warren. Could you share a little bit more about what are the key differences between how resident-owned communities and non-resident-owned communities navigate solar installations on manufactured homes? And are there any limitations associated with the solar installations for ROCs or nonprofit ROCs?
Well, there are no limitations for ROCs beyond two. One is any physical limitations. Can the roof support solar? Is there sufficient land for a shared solar array? Is there space near the houses for ground-mounted or pole-mounted installations? That's one set of requirements. Are there any physical limitations that would prevent solar from coming to that community? The second, it's really a cooperative. and decisions are made by the residents through their cooperative. And it's just a question, do they want solar or not? If they want solar and it's financially beneficial for them and there are no physical limitations, they can go ahead and do it. Now, that's a different situation than in the more typical community where there's a owner of the property who's not the owner of the houses. That owner of the property, for whatever reason, might not want there to be solar there, may think it's ugly, may think it's just going to cause complications. Or if there is an installation placed on, say, the parking lot or the community facilities, the benefit of that goes only to the community owner and it doesn't pass through to the residents. And then finally, there's the issue that I raised previously. The residents in those communities always, even though it doesn't happen a lot, they always have to be prepared for the fact that something will happen, the rents will get too high, the community will be sold off, and they'll have to move the house to another location. They may not want to invest in solar, at least the type of solar that would be hard to move. For all those reasons, in those sorts of communities, some sort of shared solar array that benefits those communities might be a good idea, or something that's easily movable, like a pole-mounted or ground-mounted installation.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Could you share a little bit more about whether or not any of the case studies or demo projects that we've seen in the report have existing energy efficiency programs or weatherization programs to support the increased adoption for solar in this market?
Well, there's nothing quite like that, but we do report in the report about an interesting effort in South Carolina that uses on-bill financing and promotes energy efficiency. And South Carolina has had a very good program for improving the energy efficiency of manufactured homes in the state. So like that effort, there are some initiatives in different locations that target energy efficiency and could be expanded to include solar, but up till now, there hasn't been all that much that targets both simultaneously.
Great. And Warren, I think to kind of wrap us up, there's still a lot of questions that we've received, but I definitely invite everyone to participate in the Learning Network. Are there any points that you want to emphasize or share about solar for manufactured homes that you haven't shared with us yet today?
Nothing dramatically new, but I do want to re-emphasize three things. This is a large market. It's an important market. If we care about solar being a technology that benefits all of society, we cannot ignore this market. That's my first point. My second point is that it's crucial to understand the housing stock and the solar market in the particular location before moving forward, because there are so many differences from place to place. You really need to analyze the specifics of the location. And that third, although it's a difficult market, it's possible to make progress. We can move forward to bring solar to more of the homes in this market. And these are individuals who own their own home, who want to benefit from improving their financial well-being. We can make progress, and we hope some of you will want to keep talking to us about this, because we do think we will be able to make progress over the next few years.
Great. Well, thank you, Warren. Thank you, Wafa. This has been a really excellent webinar. And I'm putting on your screen now some contact information for Warren and Wafa and more, the links to where you can find more information about the Clean Energy States Alliance. CESA.org is where you can find a copy of the Solar for Manufactured Homes report if you have not yet read that or would like to read it again. And I'd also like to put on your screen now just some information about webinars that we have coming up. There's even a few more in the works that are not on the list on your screen, but lots of interesting topics coming up. We hope to see you at those webinars. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Wafa and Warren, thank you both. Great webinar. I learned a lot, and we hope to see you all at the next webinar. Thanks, everyone.